This is Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, a city of 2 million people. With the onslaught of urban growth, its once lush greenery has been supplanted by cement, steel, and asphalt. Its pure mountain air is ever more clouded by the smoke and fumes of a destructive civilization. Yet one can find here and there neighborhoods that still preserve their former character. La Pastora is one of the most typical. Hector Poleo feels a strong attachment for the old Caracas of his childhood and youth. He comes here on every visit to Venezuela. This is the block on which he was born in 1918. Here we see him with his brothers and sisters, in the company of their parents, Jesus Maria Poleo and Luisa Antonia de Poleo. Newspaper illustrations had an early fascination for Poleo, whose first drawings date from the age of 3. At 9, his piercing gaze foretells the artist-to-be. The square before the church of La Pastora was one of the first observation posts from which he discovered the surrounding world.
Señor, usted no sabe hacer pan. ¿Cómo hace los toros los que torean? Y un toro se muere.
Close by was the house of Arturo Michelena, a Venezuelan painter of the last century. Constant visits to that house may have determined Poleo's artistic calling. Caracas then was quite different from now. Here was the School of Fine Arts, which Poleo entered at the age of 12. Close by the school was a church known as the Santa Capilla. This is how it looked in 1937 when Poleo painted it with Mount Avila in the background. He also painted the Capitol building, surrounded by vegetation that no longer exists, and enveloped in a special atmosphere he created from shades of gray and green. Poleo's period as an urban landscapist was a short one. Even then, the human element was foremost in his work. The figure studies he did at age 16 provide an insight into what was to become the constant preoccupation of his career. On a study trip to Mexico, he was particularly attracted by the country's muralists. At the Academy of San Carlos in Mexico City, where he studied mural techniques, he fraternized with his classmates. For his graduation party, he dressed up as a diplomat. In Mexico, he refined his handling of line. Here we witness the birth of a master draftsman who, with but little recourse to shading, can create an illusion of bulk by mere outline. Cityscapes once again made an appeal to him. At times, his technique was impressionistic. At other times, he relied more on drawing, as in this view of the church at Tasco, in which transparent color is underlain by a solid foundation of line. The influence of the muralists and Poleo's interest in fresco technique are evidenced by this composition. The muralist influence gradually faded after his return to Caracas, however. Country folk people his canvases, and his mastery of drawing becomes more and more apparent. The Three Police Inspectors is perhaps the most important work of this period. It still has a certain Mexican accent. Seeking to free himself from that accent, Poleo returned to the same subject 2 years later. This time he made use of stronger colors, tending towards somber tones. The landscape took on an air of desolation. Outlines are less sharply defined, as one can see from a comparison of this detail with the corresponding detail of the earlier painting. The strong peasant faces stand out against the barren waste of the landscape. A fellowship from the Guggenheim Foundation permitted Poleo an extended stay in New York, where the works you now see were painted. The atmosphere of war weighed heavily upon the late 30s and early 40s. The carnage of those years caused Poleo to turn to surrealism. Unexpected presences made themselves felt about him. He was beset by fears, submerged in dreams of despair. This oil, entitled Now What, with its air of unreality, is the product of Poleo's subconscious. Here we have a self-portrait in which the artist imagines himself blind and senile, blasted by war, withered by age. In the upper part of the picture is another self-portrait in which the artist appears as a young man, but with his left eye detached from its socket. This concept, an obsession with Poleo, stems from an accident he suffered during his youth, which almost resulted in the loss of an eye. He now has to wear dark glasses for protection against the glare of light. In this picture, entitled The Anxiety of Waiting, he depicts man as an adolescent, calm in the face of earthly corrosion. With the return of peace, Poleo moved from New York to Paris, where he married a Venezuelan by the name of Adela Rico, a ceramicist who had come to France for study. Since that time, she has been not only his constant companion, but also the preferred model for his paintings. After 4 years in Paris, the artist became homesick for his native land. Here we see him in Caracas, amid colleagues who have come to pay a visit to his studio. His daughter, Maria Alexandra, was born in 1957. Portraits of his wife abound in this period. Here we see her among her ceramics. The composition is stylized, appearing to have undergone the influence of the Byzantine icon we see in the background. The Devils of Yare, based on Venezuelan folklore, is a canvas of intense color. The artist began to experience a need for radical change. His human figures grow tall and thin and take on a classic repose reminiscent of the art of ancient Greece. Once again, drawing comes to the fore. Along with a change of style came a change of residence as Poleo returned to Paris. The environment was favorable to artistic development. The painter found frequent contact with critics and other artists in the studios and cafes of Montparnasse highly stimulating. Here we see him with two fellow countrymen, Jesus Soto and Carlos Cruz Diez. Poleo's return to Paris was marked by growth of the restlessness and discontent he had first felt in Caracas. There was something about his painting, a rigidity of line, that did not allow him to express himself freely, he says. A long period of apparent inactivity permitted him to take a more objective view of his work. Afterwards, using casein, he undertook some compositions in which the human figure becomes less important. These he executed with complete freedom. In them, one can note the triumph of color over form. Little by little, Poleo's painting changed from colored drawing to direct composition in color. The change which the artist recognizes is unquestionably perceptible. A breath of poetry is infused into his work. While his composition is abstract, the human figure insinuates itself, presenting an unexpected visage from time to time. Color, freed from imprisoning outlines, spreads across the canvas in a veritable explosion. The varying tonalities seem to float in space. Multiplication of forms and increased gradations in color led the artist to the idea of converting his compositions into tapestries. In this great blue tapestry, the adaptation of the concepts of painting to the techniques of weaving is effected with great spontaneity. The same is true of this tapestry of warmer tonality entitled Dawn. With the seriousness that characterizes all his undertakings, Poleo turned to the traditional center of French tapestry weaving, Aubusson. Situated in the beautiful valley of the Creuse, Aubusson maintains a medieval atmosphere in which master craftsmen pass their skills on from one generation to another. So it has been with the Pinton family, the owners of this workshop to which Poleo has come to supervise the execution of his tapestries. The artist's small-scale design will be copied faithfully by the craftsmen, but on a far larger scale. A pattern is made of the same size as the tapestry to be. On it, the forms are drawn uncolored, but with indications of shading. Each form is assigned a symbol corresponding to wool of a specific color. Samples of the yarns, each with its identifying symbol, are tied in turn one to another, forming a long cord called a rosary, or chapelet. This will serve as a reference guide, so that disparities may be avoided between the several copies of the tapestry to be made. Artist and craftsmen discuss the choice of the yarns to be used. The color range can be as great in wool as in paint. Work tools and methods have not changed since the Middle Ages. The workmen fiercely resist the advances of modern technology.
Oui, on va enlever ça. Bon, c'est beaucoup mieux. De détails de tissage, c'est son problème, c'est son affaire.
Poleo is a tireless, highly disciplined worker. In Paris, he applies himself to still another creative activity, lithography. Once again, we come upon a technique that has undergone no change since its invention at the end of the 18th century, save that in some places the drawing is made on a metal plate rather than upon stone. The drawing stands out in relief, and from it, impressions are taken. As each plate is printed, the various colors are superimposed and combined owing to the transparency of the ink that is used.
Ah bah oui, mais ça, je voulais... Oh là là.
Whenever the services of a skilled workman are required, there must be close cooperation with the artist, who must exercise supervision to ensure that the result corresponds to his intent.
Bon, c'est beaucoup mieux.
Oui, c'est vrai.
Mais de toute façon, la figure... On va les faire monter si c'est trop fort. Si on fait monter, ça va monter aussi.
Ah oui.
Poleo has also developed an interest in jewelry design. Here again, the human face makes its appearance. It is the continuing motif in Poleo's work. Gennady of Paris executes the artist's designs in precious metals and enamels. None of these activities, however, keeps Poleo away from his easel for long. Here his daughter, Maria Alexandra, poses for a crayon drawing. According to Poleo, his art might currently be described as a mixture or fusion of abstraction and elements of the dream world. At the same time, however, he feels himself bound to a form of figural expression, which he calls poetic figuration. Poleo does not divide painting into categories, figurative, abstract, or what have you. For him, he says, painting is just painting in the broadest sense of the term. Obviously, there are great conceptual differences between traditional, figurative painting and op art or kinetic art. The latter represent a new way of looking at things. Some say that the older type of painting has ceased to exist, and that from a historical viewpoint, it no longer has a reason for being. But for Poleo, it is foolish to try to impose kinetic art as an absolute dogma. But it is just as foolish to try to deny its existence.
Como el querer imponerlo como un dogma absoluto.
Si vivo tranquilo, si me siento bien,
Visits to the studio by friends or members of his family neither stop nor distract the artist from his work. Firmly self-disciplined, he paints or sketches day in and day out. Here, for the first time, Poleo has organized a retrospective exhibit, bringing together the fruit of many years' labor. He calmly awaits the reaction of the public. It is not long in manifesting itself. The exhibit was uncommonly successful. In the preface to its catalog, the writer Miguel Otero Silva had this to say. The artistic development of Victor Poleo reflects the four attitudes which in turn he has assumed toward life. That of the people-oriented man, that of the pessimist, that of the skeptic, and that of the poet. All these attitudes are marked by a continuing vibration of humanism and a note of incurable melancholy. In the period characterized by interest in the people, that is to say, his youth, from the very first, Poleo showed himself a champion of humanity, an artist who had consciously decided to make of man and his timeless anxieties the subject and message of his painting. Poleo's human concern was not that of the revolutionary who sets up barricades in the streets, however, or that of the soapbox orator denouncing social injustice. It takes the form, rather, of an avowal of love for his fellow men and of rejection of their appointed lot. A sense of absent humanity hangs heavy over his landscapes. A closed church door hints of a priest about to come out. Blank windows loom like frames awaiting faces. Eroded hills breathe of the woodcutters who laid them waste. Poleo's period of pessimism coincides with what art critics know as his surrealist phase. At a moment in which he was seeking to broaden his horizon, the Venezuelan painter came face to face with war, the most universal of crimes. The heart of the world was aflame with all-consuming hatred. Cities were being razed to their very foundations. Of trees, only roots remained. Little children were targets of strafing. Their crazed mothers ran wildly through the streets. The very seed of man was destroyed by atomic bombs.